advancing and embracing curiosity in a clinical space to allow clinicians to expand their deliverables beyond just face-to-face care.
Welcome to Rehab Remix, the podcast that explores the future of orthopedic rehab within the construct of clinical innovation and connected health. I'm Rohit Nayak, co-founder of Band Connect, your host for this series. In each segment, we will feature discussions with practitioners and clinicians, but we will also bring in other stakeholders such as administrators, industry leaders, researchers, each of whom are playing a role in helping advance a healthier future. I'm delighted to have you join in as listeners in this inaugural series and encourage you to engage and play a role in helping us together advance orthopedic rehab. In this inaugural segment, it is my pleasure to welcome Alex Bendersky. If you're anywhere in the PT rehab spectrum, it's hard not to intersect with Alex given his impactful roles throughout his career spanning 2 decades or more. His focus on driving improved clinical outcomes through operational excellence and emerging technologies makes him ideal candidate for this podcast. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Rohit. It is a pleasure to be here.
I was wondering if you could kick us off by providing some context of how you got started, your passion as a clinical innovator specifically, and perhaps as you do that, also give the audience some insights into where you are spending your time these days.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for allowing me the bandwidth to share my own narrative with your audience. So I am what I would refer to as a dinosaur physical therapist. I was one of the first DPT classes to ever graduate in the United States. There were only 5 programs in the country, and I was lucky enough to be in one of them. My background as a clinician is having advanced training in orthopedic and manual physical therapy, as well as having advanced training in pain management. So both are incredibly interesting. So at heart and at soul, I'm still a practicing clinician, and I still see patients 1 day a week based on my own availability because I am trying to stay relevant within patients and keeping the foot in a clinical space. My background in technology has been really through the integration of in-clinic tech stack towards patient management and patient care. So using things like virtual reality, force plates, and other forms of patient-specific technological care to expand the deliverables, to expand the capacity as a clinician. After working with a clinic technology, I've extended my resources into building a digital front door as well as building a hybrid clinical system for a legacy provider. I worked with a company that had 100 clinics, and we built a risk stratified digital front hybrid ecosystem that we offer directly to employers. So there, I think it was the first realization of true insight and the true leverage we can have as a clinical community using technology as well as using resources to extend our care beyond the clinic walls. I have since been working as a consultant for a couple of different organizations that are focusing on automation as well as integration of artificial intelligence into a clinical and musculoskeletal space. My interests are just how do you best provide treatment concordance? How do you best provide evidence-guided care in a clinical space? And how do you expand and extend clinical reach and clinical access beyond clinic walls? And so advancing and embracing technology in the clinical space, as well advancing and embracing curiosity in the clinical space to allow clinicians to expand their deliverables beyond just face-to-face care. So again, thank you for having me.
Not at all. I think that was excellent. And it basically demonstrates the diverse experiences that are driving your viewpoints, which I think is exactly what we need in this space today. You probably recall Band Connect's emphasis on blended care model that focuses on leveraging clinician-driven in-clinic experience to drive patient accountability at one level and leading to home exercise therapy. We've been calling it hybrid rehab for some period of time. And it feels as if it's finally resonating across the broader clinician population, at least from our perspective. What are your thoughts on this, particularly as there seem to be several definitions or descriptions of what hybrid rehab is?
I think it's really important to emphasize that a patient's point of view and patient's recovery journey is clinically been always categorized as a point of contact or episode of care. And that really is a disservice to the individual consuming care because there are multiple points of contact that happen before or after the actual clinical encounter. So a hybrid care is the ability to really emphasize, highlight, and provide support to individuals' recovery and clinical journey beyond clinic walls. So the ability to both extend knowledge, expand expertise, and provide care through different iterations, different points of clinical recovery that any consumer of healthcare services has and needs, because we know that musculoskeletal problems especially tend to be on a persistent side. And an individual that experiences a musculoskeletal complaint, for example, in their 40s, is going to continue to consume healthcare for the rest of their lives at a rate of about 2 to 3 times a year through that expensive in-person care. But then there is really a void for clinical services that go away from the in-person care. So the hybrid model, I think, is underutilized and remains poorly defined, with an exception, obviously, of organization like yours that are doing a good job creating a more granular appreciation of this hybrid deliverables.
You said it and described it beautifully. I think looking at that continuum, and as we engage more and more with the clinics that we're working with, we're getting into the notion of that continuum in the post-acute space. So we're looking at terms such as prehab, in terms of how one get ready for surgery or optimize health pre-surgery, and then the maintenance mode once you're done with your active clinical journey. So looking at your LinkedIn post activity, you're prolific in terms of what you share, and I enjoy it. We hear the term evidence-based a lot, and clearly you sort of carry that flag pretty high. How do you personally define and apply it on an ongoing basis? Because people are using that term in a variety of different ways.
I think evidence-based care has been ingrained into the physical therapy model of care delivery.
Yeah.
But there are really two ways of looking at it. There's evidence-based care and evidence-guided care. And there's a continuous emergence of best available clinical evidence towards delivery of care, right? Service is essentially the delivery of optimal knowledge and information to the patient to help the optimized recovery. And so to be guided by references, to be guided by information and data is evidence-guided care. So access and accessibility to evidence should guide the clinician to optimize the deliverables. In essence, to degrees of confidence in what you're doing, whether it aligns with what's been recommended or misaligns. I think the challenge here is to have clinicians be capable and have access to different reference points to justify and validate their deliverables. And that it really is my effort to post different articles and to post on LinkedIn and beyond. I recorded a course series on MedBridge for the same reason, to really get the information out there, hopefully as a service to our clinical community so that they have at least the ability to consume this evidence. And the consumption is a completely different caveat too. So I think even if somebody reads a title of my post on LinkedIn, that's already a value add, because that either confirms their heuristic and their beliefs, and if it does not, if it contradicts their beliefs, that at least challenges their worldview to be updated with a better available evidence. And that's the Bayesian statistics, right? The Bayesian reasoning for it. So.
Thanks for that enunciation and that distinction. So I think that's fantastic. From a Band Connect standpoint, it was one of the principles that we started the company with, was making sure that whatever we delivered, particularly since we were being clinician focused, we're providing solutions of clinicians better engage with their patients. And we felt that we needed to be clinically driven. That's why we've taken the condition specific approach, even though it's narrow, it's deep and allows us to do what we're doing. So switching gears a little bit now, talking about patient engagement, a topic that'll never end and it'll always evolve and grow. So what do you think from your standpoint, your practice standpoint? You're doing some of it today and you're working with various technologies. What's the biggest difference in keeping patients engaged and motivated during rehab? We're seeing a lot of increased compliance and engagement with our technology, but I couldn't pinpoint to you specifically what is the combination of values that brought that outcome. We're still digging into that.
Yeah, it's a terrific question, Rahid. I think that there are two ways to break this question down. And the first one is that having a product or process that is patient-centered, which is that patient-centeredness has to do with the individual or consumer actually understanding and wanting to consume these services and products and processes. The second part is to do with value allocation. So does a consumer see value in these deliverables? Is there a well-aligned value with what the consumer wants, needs, or has? And part of that engagement phenomena is teaching the teacher, teaching the consumer about the actual value. So framing the value in a way that constructs a real world solution to that individual. So engagement as a process and engagement as a product need to align with both. They need to be centered around the patient, and they need to have a very clearly communicated and framed value system.
Yeah. And we're learning a ton across all the different things that we're doing as well in terms of how to make that experience specific and unique. And we call it personalized, but personalized that can also have various dimensions to it. We're learning as we go along. So we talked a little bit about hybrid, right? But you cannot talk about hybrid these days without talking about RTM or remote therapeutic monitoring. And I think it got a resurgence of attention these days with the new Peterson report that just came out, I think, last week or the week before. And just wanted to get your perspectives on where you see RTM fitting in and evolving based upon what you're seeing in the industry. I know it's still early.
I think RTM as a product, again, needs to be well defined. So I'm a big advocate of using the continuous hybrid solutions to expand the level of care. And RTM services is really the billing codes that make us eligible for a reimbursement for this type of service. CMS created a set of rules and a set of principles that make providers eligible for reimbursement based on availability of these digital solutions, based on the level of engagement. So the RTM codes themselves are absolute must, because you need to have a skin in the game. A provider needs to have an incentive structure to be able to provide these services. The RTM as a product, you divide it into three categories. It has to be remote, so you have to engage with it, not in your traditional space. It has to be therapeutic. There has to be something that adds to your therapeutic value. Like, you can't just create a nudge architecture that bothers people, that doesn't serve their and purpose of getting better. And it has to be a structure that has a beginning and the end. It has to be a solution that has a more natural architecture to it, so that you know when you start and when you stop. So there's a continuous flow that has a well-defined parameters to when you start, when you stop, and why you're engaging in it. So the RTM itself is a billing code, but RTM-based products ideally extend and in-person care solutions beyond clinic walls. So they're brilliant.
Yeah, when we started Band Connect, RTM didn't exist. And so we were pleasantly surprised. And many of us see this as a stepping stone, perhaps at some point, probably looking more and more distant now, but to value-based care, something that we've all been talking about for some time, but hasn't necessarily touched rehab therapy extensively. I really love a couple of concepts that you just said here. So one is the continuous notion of RTM. So it's more than a billing code. And I think the other part that I think touches upon some of what we're seeing in the industry today, but helps clarify it, is that notion of therapeutic value. I think that's brilliant.
There's an interesting concept, and I think if you dig into that size and scale of impact, right, the impact factor from any form of clinical encounter. Like, so there are impact factors that can be evaluated on a contextual factors. Like, there's an impact factor from the color of paint you have in your clinic walls. That impacts recovery, right? Like, that there's an impact factor of how long somebody has to sit and wait for their appointment to start. Like, every minute carries a specific economic value Now, there's an impact
Yeah.
factor from the type of cologne or perfume that a therapist wears if they wear it, because they can either deter or attract an individual into feeling that there's a, and these are all arbitrary and subjective factors. And then there's objective factors that provide impact. One is a dose response. There's a direct, well-structured, well-measured, volume-based dose response from therapeutic encounter. Like there is a dosage of exercise that needs to be complied with in order to have an effect.
Right.
The better the compliance, the higher the effect. There's an impact factor from the engagement, like you have to have an individual putting their effort into it. There's a therapeutic factor from the psychological strata of an individual's layout and likelihood belief system that plays into that system actually working for them. So most clinicians need to understand and appreciate that anything and everything they do has a factor. And then to question, if we go back into the evidence-based and evidence-guided care, your ability to provide up-to-date treatment concordance increases your impact factor. So if you are
Right.
treatment concordant, you're just creating a higher level of impact versus if you're continuing to practice clinical care like you did 20 years ago or 15 years ago without ever questioning whether your clinical deliverables have been updated to reflect what's best available evidence.
So thank you for that. I think we're getting a few nuggets from you that are brilliant. Love it and thank you. So a broader question again is, are there any myths or misconceptions about rehab therapy that you frequently find yourself addressing, things that bother you that you feel as if you have to correct? So.
I think there's plenty. I think the most important thing is to create a more of a standardized process and a standardized product that can be labeled physical therapy or occupational therapy. I think right now these services and products are used interchangeably. There is a very big difference between a physical therapy as a service and a physical therapist as a provider. And most of the consumers don't understand the difference, so they tend to interject both or use them synonymously, which they shouldn't. Physical therapy as a deliverable, as a service, is a healthcare discipline. Physical therapist as a provider is a professional trained in that discipline. Each provider's training can reflect their own niches and their own independent philosophies, but the provider's overarching model is physical therapy, which is a service, which I think can and should be better standardized. We as a clinical community will only get more response and probably higher value allocation if we're able to guarantee the rudimentary, at least the foundational level of what physical therapy as a service means. If we can all agree on a narrative of deliverables, like A, B, and C needs to be delivered whenever somebody consumes physical therapy. And you don't see that. So my frustration is that a same individual consuming physical therapy services in 5 different locations will have 5 very different experiences, have potentially 5 very different outcomes, and will have 5 very different point factors that not necessarily should be that way, because there's a way to create a shared aligned narrative between all of us as professionals.
I didn't start with a physical therapy background. It's been my life for the last 4 or 5 years. And I was pleasantly surprised in my engagement with clinicians, with physical therapists and others, about the level of engagement, the level of training that they've gone through. They're highly qualified individuals. And to a certain extent, the whole industry as a whole, that whole segment is undersold. I don't think people in the general community understand the level of qualifications that your physical therapist has in order to do what he or she is doing with you. But that may be a cause and an effect circumstance based on what you just described. But yeah, I'm sort of motivated now to try to help that cause, to drive awareness more and more about the great things that are there. It can be achieved through that
Like
clinician.
an interesting phenomenon. Like, so even like you're going to use a pop culture artifact. My wife and I are watching the show called The Pit. Uh, and
Mhm.
there's a point, like there's always a reference for physical therapy where it's a recovery trajectory. An individual with an orthopedic injury gets, it's like, well, you're going to probably get a referral for an orthopod. And after the orthopod, you're going to get sent to physical therapy, right? That roadmap is illogical, because if you know that the physical therapy is the end stop, if it's a final resting stop, and you've eliminated any risk factors, why is physical therapy not at the forefront of that picture of that narrative. It's like, and I think our culturally, we're so used of this convoluted, complex medical system that, like, along the lines. So you're absolutely right. Physical therapists are professionals that have superior training. We're also unfortunately naive enough to be humble about not wanting to promote our training. We're very
That's good.
comfortable, right? We're so humble. We're patient servants. We want to be liked by everyone. And like, when you're liked
Yeah.
by everyone, you're actually loved by no one. So like that is like, it's okay to stir some water. It's okay to create a little bit of a conflict in a larger healthcare system in order to assert your own fit. And in order to assert your own fit, you have to be able to ruffle some feathers and say, well, look, if your traditional workflow is that you have a PCP referral followed by an orthopod, followed by imaging, followed by physical therapy referral, and we know, we've studied this, we know that if you go physical therapy first, or if you go through that convoluted model, the clinical outcomes are actually superior from physical therapy first. The clinical expenditure there's a 6-time multiplier when you go through the traditional model versus PT first model. And yet clinicians, physical therapists, are really, like, careful about not promoting that, because we don't like to alienate our referral sources. We don't like to stir the water. We're so comfortable being this physician extender role, which we potentially were in 1918 when we were,
Yeah.
right? Like that, we've outlived our World War I fit, but we need to embrace
Yeah.
the model. Like, it's been 100 years, time to shape up. So
Physical therapist is not a clinician extender, is the way that I look at it. That's great. Thanks for highlighting that point. I know I could go on this, but let me sort of try to wrap this up with some fun, quick response questions. I got a couple of these. What's a trend in rehab that excites you?
automation and AI,
A trend that worries you?
automation and AI.
I was betting you would say that. I love it. If you could remix one thing about the way we do rehab today, what would that be?
Putting a physical therapist in a decision-making role, especially with payers and legislators. Legislature and payers need to have PT representatives in a decision-making roles making these policies. We will not move forward without it.
Thank you. That was fantastic. Where can listeners follow your work or learn more?
LinkedIn is always a good start. I'm
Yeah.
always accessible and reachable. I have a consulting agency called Rehab Think Tank, which is dormant. And just in general, look for me at the conferences. I'll be attending that APTA Future Rehab Conference in July. I will be at the APTA PPS in November, and that's CSM next year. I should be giving 2 or 3 lectures at the CSM next year. So yeah, looking forward to it. And Rohit, thank you for this. I think we've had prior conversations, and it's never a
Yeah.
dull moment. So I think you definitely are driving our profession forward with your initiatives and your ventures. We need more of you and your type of narrative to push us forward. So I appreciate this.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, hope you enjoyed this discussion. Alex Bendersky, don't miss him, look him up. I want to thank you for engaging in this discussion and, more importantly, for all the groundbreaking work that you're doing. So thank you,
Appreciate
Alex.
it.
Folks, you've been listening to Rehab Remix, produced by Band Connect. I'm Rohit Nayak, inviting you to join us next time as we continue our journey forward in what we like to call the hybrid rehab revolution. You like that, Alex? Please follow us and subscribe to our Band Connect channel. Thank you.